Hello and welcome to CherrySTEM number 11, Tech for Men by Men, or FMBM, as the young kids will call it. So today we have a lovely panel of guests slash permanent hosts. So me, Anna Cherry, we got Richard Rall, and then we also have the Doge, Brian Martinez and Direhawk, Jonathan Doyle. Speaking of the Doge, it is actually his birthday today, so wish him well. And we at the Badger Cave, or the Honey Badger Radio channel, wish Brian many more years with us and in general. And also, thank you so much for joining us on your birthday. That is super awesome.
Oh, well, thanks for having me. And yeah, I have a piece of cake in the fridge. I'll have it maybe later. But thank you for the birthday wishes.
Absolutely. So speaking of, actually not really anything, I don't have a segue for this one, but we are talking about tech and VR, AR, all fun things like that, kind of bridging of the human with the tech. So as we have previously talked in Low Life High Tech, a bit of cybernetics, a bit of cyberization, a bit of prosthetics talk, and also how it can actually help men. So this is, as we mentioned, technology by men and for men. So we're going to talk about a variety of cool new techs, as well as I mentioned, more transhumanist type topics, especially since Deus Ex, Mankind Divided, the video game, has come out, or is coming out, or has already come out, and we can all discuss the sphere of sci-fi that has been quite plentiful lately about transhumanism, as well as some really cool actual technologies that we have, and where we could possibly go, or where we are headed as humans, and how we're going to integrate with machines in the future. So to start off, though, I would like to go for a little video, just super quick. I don't think there's going to be any sound to it, so we can just enjoy a visual presentation. And it is the inside of the Google data center. So if we're going to be talking about tech and a lot of these technologies and games, etc., and AR, VR, all of that is related to internet, and we search for all these things through Google. So I thought it would be really cool to visualize and see where we actually have all of our Google-ness and YouTube-ness stored. And we're going to have that little video in just a second as soon as I can set it up. Here we go.
And right now I've got constant Doge on my screen, so I don't know if that's for everyone or if yours is going to start showing up.
I'm not sure, but if you click on my name, and that's what I did present to everyone, so hopefully that's the overwhelming image.
Okay, good. Yeah.
We'll see. And I'm going to mute it, just, it would be nice if there was some sort of music, but I don't want to deal with copyright stuff, so we're just going to have a silent, meditative a minute and 45 seconds.
I could sing something.
There you go. There you go.
Conversation.
Happy birthday. This is the Google Data Center. What happens when you search something in Google, or go to your email, or go on YouTube? Where is all of that information stored? Well, here's a visual tour using Google View, of course.
Oh, that's neat. I didn't realize they'd allow you to go up in the Googleplex with the Google navigation thing. That's kind of neat.
They probably had a day they set aside to just kind of have the drones run through and take happy pictures of everybody being happy. So yeah, it's pretty self-explanatory, as it has subtitles. But they do mention in the video, if you do watch it, I will link it in the low bar, that you can, they store information on at least 2 servers. So each individual piece of information about yourself, like your Gmail or what have you, is stored on at least 2 servers, so you can have access to it in such a timely manner because of that.
It's probably some purposeful redundancy as well. That's some cool stuff there. Yeah, it looks like they have it. So this is just a video. What are they? Okay, they're destroying hard drives. Is this just a video tour? Because at first it was doing the Google walkthrough thing.
Yeah, it's just a general video of what the data farm is like, and what goes on there, what it looks like on the inside.
So you're kind of giving us a feel for the
where
machine.
all the information is. Yeah, the machine, the mind of the machine. indeed, or at least one part of the machine. So that was a good start to that. And so what I'd actually like to start with, since we're going to have a bit of a theme, or at least a road to the show, I would like to start actually in talking with Jonathan with Direhawk about some of his latest VR projects. And guys, in case you guys have not been keeping up with some of the latest happenings with the Badger Cave, etc., on the Honey Badger Twitter and YouTube channel, we've had some videos that are really cool, taken with drones, etc. And Jonathan has worked a lot in the VR field. So I would just like to give the floor to Direhawk so he can talk a little bit more about his projects and things that he's doing, the tech for men, or by men, as it is in this case, and just kind of talk about that, Jonathan, if you will.
Yeah, sure. Well, my interest in VR probably goes all the way back to my childhood. I guess it goes back to getting my first VR experience, which we've all had, and that would be the Viewmaster, if you remember that thing. But it was just a still image, but the idea that I could actually see something that was on film, but it was in 3 dimensions, and it would kind of like block out my sensory view of the world, and just give me that, really got my child imagination going, that I could go into it, that I wanted to go into those spaces that they were giving me. So ever since then, I've been always wanting to actually go into those worlds. And then I got teased again when I got introduced to video games back in the 80s. And I've had to go through the decades, through the evolutions of that. And it's been a kind of a long journey trying to break through these, sheets of glass and film and all that stuff, to be able to get a real immersive feeling, to be actually break into these fictional worlds or real worlds that have been captured and then served up to me. So that's just the short form of why I've been always interested in that kind of thing. But and as for projects, I've been working in a group called Project Mosul. They're a group of people that have been working in the world of archaeology, and we've been trying to piece together, using photographs and that, in a process called photogrammetry, to reconstruct structures, sculptures, various archaeological things that have been destroyed by ISIS, so that when it's in a digital format, it could be saved for posterity, or it could also be used to reconstruct all the fabric, fragments or whatever, to resurrect them again, so they can be shared. So there's that. And then personal projects has been, I've always been interested in heritage and preserving history, and I'm not really good at being able to explain my own thoughts, but like all summer I've been kind of running around, and well, for the last couple of years I've been running around and using photogrammetry, capturing various historic sites that haven't even been deemed historic and just been left to be forgotten. Like, I live in Saskatchewan, and its roots kind of go back into like agriculture. Now, I'm not a farmer myself, but my family that immigrated here went to farming and that. And when I was growing up, I would see just all these, freestanding farm buildings and abandoned farmyards and stuff all over the place, and even ghost towns. And I always wondered, what the stories were behind that. And over the years, I saw them slowly disappearing and just falling away. And even the old people that were around me, I tried to get their stories, trying to understand what the history was of this province. And so I was always interested in that. So I've been going around while I could, capturing all these structures and buildings and stuff, and then turning them into 3-dimensional models. And my hope is to be able to kind of have a huge library of these things, so that people can see them and then try to tack on all the individual history, if I can find it, onto it. And that I've been working on trying to get it so that you can go into the buildings themselves and kind of look around and that.
So basically, you're kind of like a new type of archaeology and history preservationist, because I mean, of course, you know, as we advance in you know, virtual technology, it becomes more ubiquitous. That's going to be the way in which classrooms and the way in which people can really you know, be interested in history. And so yeah, that's really awesome, because I'm sure that's going to, you know, interest people in these things that, you know, are really important to know, you know, to know where you're going, to know where you've come from. I really love history. That's a neat way of doing things. When you mentioned the ViewMaster thing, I just realized that that's really, you know, something that got me into VR as well.
Oh yeah, and I mean, you know, this has been a kind of a trek for humanity for a long time. The first, I guess, the first experiment looking into the possibility of trying to find artificial ways to record and present, you know, reality itself would be something that was invented in 1938. I'll get my glasses on so I can actually. It's just a short little thing, just so that you know how far back this goes. There's a man by the name of Charles Wheatstone, and he did an experiment where he showed that the brain can construct a 3D image from two 2D images. So it was the stereoscope viewer, and it was invented in 1838, which leads you to what we know now as the ViewMaster. But it's those two images that is, you know, what's in our virtual reality glasses. It's just that we have video, and all this new technology has been applied to this. So if it's we're still using, you know, old concepts because they work, but we're applying new technology to the problem. So
there's also a variety of other ways in which VR has been used, of course, traditionally. With healing and soldiers, PTSD, and a lot of work with amputee type. Well, we'll get into a little more of that later when we talk about more a significant cyberization, so to speak, where we have humans with, you know, artificial limbs and things like that. But just from VR experience alone, we've had, I believe his name is, let me just get it exactly. Oh, Skip Rizzo. He is a creator of Virtual Iraq, as well as Virtual Afghanistan, where it's an experience that allows soldiers to go through the explosions and the sights and the smells that actually, and the kinetic associations that they had with that place, so that they can engage emotionally with their memory and thereby reduce the fear and reduce the PTSD response. It's a healing process to deal with PTSD and other trauma. And some of these machines, they actually are attached to sets and things like that. So you will have, 1 second. There you go. There's some type of over the rainbow singing happening, which is lovely, but I feel like I'm like yelling to try to overcompensate for it. All right. So yeah, there's the machine that is involved in Virtual Iraq. It actually is connected to scents and little jars that have like various scents in them, and variety of things like that to provide all 5 senses with an experience, not just the visual. So I really see how something like that could be tied in for a more educational or a recreational use with VR for a project like Jonathan's, where you have a virtual tour of a place, a historical place, a historical time, and you can have all the sights and smells, and that would be very. And of course, that would be the future of television, obviously. We already have been talking about where's smell-o-vision, you know. So for something like VR becoming quite popular, I can see theaters springing around this, and I would be very curious to see how they portray some of the middle centuries, like the 14th and the 16th, since the bathing and the hygiene wasn't particularly a thing, and the idea is that glamorous towns like Paris, etc., you know, stunk of, you know, like just horrible things. So it would be very interesting just how realistic we can get with this, and if there's some way from there to develop technology to capture smells and to have actual realism and not just, you know, somebody making something up kind of like Foley for sound effects, but for smells of previous eras. But maybe we can start recording smells and feelings of this era, and before it gets destroyed, first of all, or hopefully if things don't get destroyed and we continue on, as a species that we have a record for the future selves, our kids, et cetera, generations of humans, to see where we sort of came from and some of the challenges that we faced. But also VR is being used to help with obvious phobias and addiction, and even things like autism. They are considering doing some VR-assisted therapy for autism. And there's a company called Viscera that creates interactive technologies that help you with sort of, I guess, empathy, or just a alternate life or alternate experience of being human. And for them in particular, they did a virtual reality experience that is designed to simulate schizophrenia. So you actually hear the voices echoing in your head and a variety of other symptoms that people with schizophrenia experience. So that is an interesting also tie-in to actually some movies that I wish I could remember a name, that had some of the similar experiences where, you know, you have a mind port where you hook up to a memory or experience and you get to relive something that somebody else did. So with VR, there's a lot of that sort of sci-fi sphere that can be explored. And we can go between it actually helping people in training, to being healing, to just plain entertaining, to being historical. So there's a plethora of what we can do with this sort of newer technology for entertainment, recording, etc.
Yeah, there's also, I just want to throw it in there because I watched some things about virtual reality. Excuse me. There's also a downside to this too, meaning that because it can be used to help people, learn things that, for example, surgery, or in the military, you can teach people valuable skills. You could even show children how to play sports with it, and this way, you know, they learn how to do it without as much of the risk. The downside is that people can also use it to push their ideologies, and I say that just as a warning. And I know that we probably are aware of that, but I'm reminded of the whole thing with Digra and how they wanted video games to be used as education, and they wanted them to be educational tools. And just like any tool, they can be used for the wrong purposes, for the purposes of pushing narratives that they believe in. And another example of that is that I recall Brianna Wu herself saying that she had been looking into VR technology for games that she wanted to make that dealt with the stuff that she believes in. So just as an aside, there is another part to it, and VR is a tool, and therefore it can be used for, you know, for less sort of responsible purposes, I guess.
Yeah, it's a matter. The more powerful the tool, the more powerful its potential for good or evil. It's just kind of, you know, that's just kind of something we have to face. It's funny because this will eventually get to something that I want to talk about, is the Luddites, that we constantly have people who want to push back against technology, and a lot of times I feel that myself to a certain extent. You know, when you see how badly things can go, and you kind of have this feeling of that, you know, has our reach exceeded our grasp? You know, are we doing more harm than good? But the truth of the matter is, technology is it's just like a spider's web, and, you know, is genetically encoded in a spider. It's a type of technology itself. Technology, our development of technology is part of us, and trying to kind of, you know, stop that is not going to work out. You know, Luddites get left behind, and so and this dovetails very much into the you know, the prosthetics conversation, but I don't know if we were ready to head in that direction yet or not.
Well, I just have one thing. Like, imagine how it's going to change, say, court cases. Like, I know police officers in a lot of places, they actually wear cameras wherever they go now. Now, imagine if they have, you know, 3D, 360 cameras that are high resolution, recording 360-degree what's happening on the scene. Because we don't have eyes in the back of our head, they could actually re-examine it from any angle they want to now, because they'd be capturing the entire area that the cop was in, and be able to, you know, make a better judgment.
Well, yeah, that absolutely reminds me of, so, okay, I gotta divulge, I gotta have a confession. Canadian sci-fi is like my favorite thing ever. They have so many fantastic shows coming out of, specifically Vancouver Island area. There's like the same actors too, used in all the shows practically, because they have like a local Canadian group of sci-fi actors. And one of the shows is Continuum, and they actually have that. They have the enforcers, the cops, whatever. They have retina cameras that record. So it's not 360, but they do have retinal cameras and things like that that record basically the memory, then it becomes, of the experience that they'd had investigating something or pursuing a suspect or whatever, and they basically daily submit it for review and things like that, and they're open to scrutiny. And I really kind of appreciate it, even though it kind of ends up being more kind of a Star Warsy, like Rebel Alliance somewhat of a situation. You still have a sense that these cops, even though they're working for not necessarily pure or good intentioned people, there's still a code of honesty and trying to be, you know, an upholder of the law in an honest sense. And the camera is like part of that, and it's a prideful thing. And I really appreciated that sort of view of enforcers and public servants that they are. So that was really cool. Anyway, just completely reminding me of that, and it's also a Canadian show. But that segues into the last thing I wanted to mention, which is, you know, I'm glad what you guys brought up, because we basically are talking about, yes, it is a tool. It can be used for bad, but it can also be used for good. And so, well, I guess let's see if how many good things it can be used for can outweigh potentially the bad things. And I feel like the worst, so to speak, it can do is, unless you like do some unlawful, you know, brainwashing, like sleep deprivation, blinking lights, you know, ridiculous subliminal messaging, which question is if it even works. Unless you're doing any of that, the most I feel like VR is going to do is give people an experience of being with other people, and that can only go so far. Obviously, you know, tools can be dangerous. You can be brainwashed by groups of people. You can sort of have, and the whole brainwashing thing. That
happened with TV, though. I mean,
right. I was about to say, as a neuropsychologist, I feel like we really need to define brainwashing as either the general thing that almost absolutely everybody is susceptible to one degree or another, hence why advertising works.
Yeah, it's called influence.
Right. We go from influence to straight up brainwashing, which it by itself, just like confessions under torture, are basically not real. You're not really actually getting the truth out of people. Same with quote unquote brainwashing. There's really no technique to make somebody change completely unless they already had a desire to be a particular way, and that gets influenced and played up, and they feel like whatever story they have for themselves coincides with this new thing that they're doing. So that's not really brainwashing. It is a way of a person to be carried to something they want to do already. So that's, you know, I feel like we need to talk about that some other time. But the good things that we can use virtual reality for is something that not only can help like little kids, whereas we're talking about history, preserving things that may be destroyed by certain people. Just like imagine the Library of Alexandria, if we could have a virtual reality or some sort of pictorial or whatever, any kind of a record of that before it was destroyed. So my heart really goes out to the project that Jonathan's on with that, you know, projects, or artworks that are being destroyed in the Middle East currently. So I feel like that is really important to do that. And not only can we do that as a historical record with VR, but we can also provide something as simple as nature through VR. And in fact, I stumbled upon a University of Florida, I believe, like presentation. They were presenting a way to have younger generation kids who suffer from ADHD and a variety of other autism and a variety of other disorders, that a big part of it actually has to do with nature deficit disorder. I mean, we have actual evidence, and I believe we've talked about this during the coping strategies for depression, that I think it's the second or third show, that seeing nature just outside of your window in a recuperating room in a hospital versus seeing a blank wall will help an outpatient heal 3 days faster, 3 whole days. Faster healing and recuperation process by just being exposed to a little bit of nature. We obviously came from nature. We are intrinsically attached to it. We eat from it. We are born of it, yet we put ourselves in at least in urban areas, we put ourselves in concrete prisons, concrete blocks, and we crawl inside them and live there all the time under fluorescent lights. So a lot of times little kids do not have access to nature, and it leads to cognitive decline, basic cognitive functioning decline. Creativity is lower, higher mental tasks come more difficultly more difficultly, are more difficult for them, and of course any kind of emotional, spiritual sensation we get from being in nature, they also don't have that. So there's actually a whole project called RISE to give they're outlining ways to use VR to connect a real life location, so a little bit Pokemon Go like with augmented reality, to use it as a way to bolster presence of green things in these kids' lives through their daily routes, through concrete jungle of New York or whatever. They can actually see more green and more nature and have half gaming or interactive, half learning and mental health sort of soothing experience of being in nature through VR on their daily basically route where there is no nature. And that's for like just more kids and things like that. But on a general scale, virtual reality and serious games, they're calling them, can be applied to healthcare and healthcare education too, such as, let's not talk about just the consumer, but let's talk about more on a, not a professional, but like on a level of some industry or a profession that can be seriously helped with VR. And so we have just basic things like haptic feedback, haptic feedback is, if I'm understanding correctly, that sort of pushback you get, vibration on your finger you get from pressing on your smartphone touch screen. So you get this like feedback response that something happened. And so they were using that and virtual reality of a head and neck model for things like dental education and a variety of other doctor educations or training where you can practice in a really meaningful way before you can actually touch a human and potentially deal with all that. Like, how do you train a student in a way that they make less mistakes but actually receive truly accurate feedback? So VR can help with that very easily. It also can help with molecular biology and a variety of other biologies, because you have this massive ability to visualize 3D objects and a variety of things to do with our health and fitness and biology. All of that has to do with 3D shapes of proteins and the atoms themselves and molecules. All of that, a huge part of it has to do with the shape that it's in, because that's actually how our bodies, like cellular processes and just how our bodies are held together and atoms are held together. It all has to do with electromagnetics and shape, because if you understand anything, well, that sounds condescending, sorry. If you understand electromagnetics, you will also know that there's a attraction and a pushback, so that it actually creates a certain shape because it has a force around it, so it like pushes things out of the way or pushes things to themselves. So shape is an integral part of how molecular and atomic processes work. So all of that is done in 3D because, well, we're 3D. And to be able to visualize that and to actually kind of get inside a molecule and get inside a protein or whatever can do massive things for cancer, AIDS, I mean, you name it. I feel like it can provide to the right, people, to the right physicians, to those who can understand these things. They can see perhaps issues that have to do with an understanding, or rather that are helped by their understanding of the 3D nature of this molecule, because that's
not just molecules, but like they could do 3D scans of a body or whatever, and then but instead of doing exploratory surgery, they could then just slough off different layers and look at things in a three-dimensional perspective that you just can't make out things in 2D that you can in 3D. And there's something additional that you get through a 3D interface that they would be able to do better diagnostics and things like that. And so I mean the technology is already kind of there to do that sort of thing, and there's just a variety of ways in which it can be helpful.
Oh yeah, they're even doing like I'm sorry, did I interrupt somebody? Go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, you were talking about with children and that. Like when I was growing up, I was diagnosed with ADD, and children, they all have different ways that they learn, and I've always looked at VR as one way to kind of help level the learning playing field here, because human beings learn best by experience. And I mean, you could take a group of kids and they all are starting at different starting levels, and you could take them to the Great Pyramid and they would come home and they would probably know just as much from that one day But if you were to go and give them a book, an equal book, each kid would know a certain amount. You know, I mean, everybody would be able to learn just as much, if not more, if we can experience it, because we learn through experiencing versus recording it down and then, because everybody learns differently, but everybody learns the same when it comes to experience. So
Yeah, something a more sensory experience impacts us in a different way. We see things as more real, whereas like through a book, it's very abstract, it's very flat. It's hard for us to draw that into our minds. And I'm sure
yeah,
as children, they don't draw it into their mind nearly as well as they do real life experiences. That's why we take them out on field trips and things like this. And so this basically, it provides a cheap way by which you can take children on field trips. Here in inner city, New York or wherever. Like inner city kids can go on a field trip to the pyramids. They can go on a field trip to Machu Picchu. They can actually go there and as the technology progresses, they can go and touch the stones. They can go and look at things. They can examine little areas that they wouldn't be able to, because sometimes a child wants to focus on what they want to focus on. So they might want to one of them might want to stare at the joints of the stones, whereas another one might want to look at the way that the plants are growing and and interacting with things. There's just different ways that, so long as they can kind of drive their experience, they're going to have an experience that fits with them better and makes it more visceral, makes it more real. And so it is it's an advanced type of learning that that just like the internet opened things up. It seems like VR will tend to open things up in education to a certain extent. And on that note, it's funny you mentioned that you've been interested in VR for a very long time. Well, it just so happens that I have a patent from I think it was in the 90s that I created in virtual reality sound that now is being created almost verbatim right now. There's a project out there where the people are doing 3D sound. So I may have to contact them about the patent infringement there.
yeah. Oh, on the mental, sorry to interrupt. I got to get this out of my head before I forget. You were mentioning mental health stuff. Well, I'm always thinking about future technologies, and I've been looking at the space program and that. And the goal for Elon Musk and maybe other people has been to go to Mars and stuff. Now that's a long trip, and we know that our bodies degrade and we have to do exercise and do different things, and they've worked on stuff to deal with that problem. But there's the other part, and that is how what it's like to be isolated on a little capsule going a long, long way, and being put on a hostile planet like that. I'm thinking VR would be a useful tool to help with mental issues like that, to be able to give them simulations of Big Back Earth, or having telepresence where you can actually virtually feel like you're home with your family, but you're still stationed on Mars, things like that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. They actually not just as I was mentioning the training that they were doing with VR, but there's a whole nother wealth of, and a lot of this information is coming from, by the way, from the Virtual Augmented Reality and Serious Games for Healthcare 1. It's a book edited by a lot of people, but I believe the first one, the last name is Minhua, I guess, Minhua and Co. So in this book, they're describing a variety of cognitive sort of aids and testing or examination procedures that can be done with VR. And so you can do VR, back to training for a little bit because it's sort of a good segue. You can, one of the last projects I was looking on here, it had to do with training medical technicians and like nurses and things like that, but training them how to have a bedside manner or how to interact with patients. And so you can have an actual virtual reality Sims basically situation for training as well. And then moving on from there, we have virtual reality for neurophysiological assessment, so you can check people's attention, spatial attention, learning and memory, things like that that are used to be taken by pen and paper tests. You can have more accurate, I suppose I would call them more accurate readings, because you not only get the same sort of results of timing and sort of speed of reaction and things like that, but you also get a lot of the facial movements and once again, 3D, I feel like that's really important. If we want to solve problems or want to understand more about ourselves and reality, that we need to start thinking in 3D, because things exist in 3D, and up to this point we've been representing them in 2D, which I feel like sometimes might remove a necessary part of conceptualizing it. So we also have a role of virtual reality in neuropsychology, where you have neuropsychologists, which is, oh, cool, they're talking about my degree. When I was getting my degree, which was a while ago, it actually was a new faculty, a new major that they added to my college in the few years that I was in it. Like the 4 or 5 years, they were in the process of really developing their neuroscience field and department. And I got my neuroscience and psychology sort of bridge major diploma, but there's really no name for it or anything. But now it's like in this book. That's really cool. So, of course, neuropsychology, my field, you can help people, you can understand interactions of a variety of things through VR instead of having to do it on piece of pen and paper and like with potential people that you like recruit out of your college, you know, psychology department for like $10 a piece. So there's some confounding potentially issues with constantly dealing with the same representative sample of college students. And so I feel like there's a lot of variety that VR can offer for testing and understanding of, you know, human cognition and things like that. And there's also ways of testing for Parkinson's and a variety of disorders like that in more older people. So we're like from kids to, you know, everyone in between to like older people. You can test for Parkinson's and a variety of other things that have to do with cognitive decline through VR and see more accurately and detect earlier some of these issues, specifically Parkinson's. So there's a lot of cool stuff that has to do with the interaction of the brain or our mind and VR and games. And obviously we talked about phobias and things like that. You can legitimately decrease somebody's fearful reaction to, you know, a stimuli like a spider or like, I don't know, height through exposure to VR I don't know, irritants or what you call them. It's kind of like allergy therapy, but for like your fear. So since VR is sort of in the mind and it kind of occupies, it engages the mind a lot. So from there, I don't know if this is a good segue or not to talk about, you know, some of the DARPA-funded blood implants, brain implants that travel through the blood and wireless mind control and fun things like that. What do you think?
Yeah, sure. That's what I was going to say. Is like a lot of the, you know, when it comes to the you know, there's like a couple of different things that tend to drive humanity, and you know, it's like porn is what made the internet, but a lot of our technologies actually come through military needs. In other words, like we've got these a lot of veterans who have a lot of needs that need to be met in short order because they you know they're being damaged both physically and mentally, and you know, we need to do something about that. And so that's some of the good things that come out of DARPA a lot of times. Though of course they will turn it for more nefarious ends as well. But let's focus on the positive. So you know, they have been developing, like there's a, you know, I think probably, I don't know if you provided it in the links or whatever, but the implants, I think that maybe people don't realize that a lot of the sci-fi and things like that, like for instance, you mentioned the Deus Ex game coming out, and that's like the newer version of it. But the whole idea that they're kind of going behind in Deus Ex is that, you know, you have these augmented humans, which are basically people who've been significantly cyberized, who you know, through one thing leads to another, and you've got the combination of Luddites who are against cyberization in general because of like religious, moral, whatever grounds. You know, the same old argument every time technology comes up, you're playing God. And you know, then that's going to be something that happens because here we already are at a point at which significant cyberization is happening. So these are not just sci-fi concepts. These are these are right on, not just on the horizon, but they're already here. For instance, there is a variety of. I hope, did you put a few of those links in the description or something, babe?
I'm actually doing that right this moment.
Good. So the funny thing is the Deus Ex Facebook page, for a long time when they hadn't just came out, one of the things that they kind of kept up with was a lot of the technology that has been developed, and so they go to conferences, and they've been doing a good job of actually kind of being part of an awareness campaign for prosthetics. Because here's the thing, they are developing a variety of prosthetics to not just help those who have lost limbs, but also people who've lost the use of limbs. That happens frequently. And so and then there's also, of course, creating things like powered suits to help people whose bodies no longer work very well, or for people who you need to be able to carry out extremely strenuous things such as carrying equipment, long miles, or loading boxes, or a variety of things. And so all of these things have gotten where brain interface and usage is advanced significantly, where there's a variety of ways in which one of the ways in which they make prosthetics work is through hooking to nerves in the stump, for instance, of someone who's lost a limb, and they read the signals from there. A lot of times they'll customize it to that person's, what they feel like is where their what's it called there, the phantom limb. It's like, okay, where do you feel like this is in your phantom limb? And because the nerves are still, they're still there, but they're kind of on the surface of the skin, and so they end up hooking things up so that the person can, just using thought, can use these prosthetic limbs. Well, see, the thing is that it also goes in the other direction now, where they've been able to make types of material that can sense pressure and a variety of other types of stimulation, and then send that directly to the brain. The way that they're doing that, they've got a variety of ways in which they're doing that, but one of them is they have implants in the brain, and sometimes that requires invasive surgery. But that's why we have a link here. The one link that I really recommend, the Do6 Facebook page has got lots of great stuff on prosthetics. But if you want one central point to kind of jump off from to a lot of different links, is this Wired article on the DARPA-funded implant that travels to the brain via blood vessels. So this implant, they apparently had you can inject it into a vein, kind of, and it put it all the way into the brain through that vein. And apparently they recorded the brain activity of a sheep for 190 days. And so that's in one direction, but they also have other ways in which they use electrodes to stimulate the brain so that you get the signals that devices are sending. So there's two-way communication happening. They're providing sensation, and so you've got prosthetics that are advancing in a variety of ways. They're kind of coming at it from a lot of different directions simultaneously, and making it where limbs, these prosthetic limbs, become more and more a part of the person. And what's interesting is, like, for instance, I think some of the other links I might have put in there was that the ability to read what is going on in the human brain has advanced significantly as well. And one of the other shows, I'm sure I mentioned the fact that they could read if you gave a couple of different words as a guide using fMRI, they could just determine what noun you were thinking with around 70% accuracy from this computer model. So once you gave them a few different words so that they could know where to calibrate the device, language is stored so similarly between people that they can read that. And the thing is, the same. There's something about the visual cortex that a lot of people don't realize that I found really interesting, is that the first inputs of the visual cortex are arranged like a grid, and so it's very much unlike the rest of the brain, which is much more complex. Where
if I come in for just a second, the interesting thing about the visual cortex in general, which I found interesting when I was learning about it, was the fact that we have these sort of columns, which is like, speaking of what Jonathan was mentioning, for instance, I'm a very visual learner. Like, if I don't see how things connect visually first, my brain can't really model them without having seen it at least once and observed the process. So I would like to see the actual picture of these, but from what it was described to us and was in the books, it's like they're columns, the cellular columns, and each one of them responds to a particular, let's say, slant of line. So our visual cortex is broken down so much to the point where one particular cellular column will respond to a forward slash, one particular different one will respond to a backward slash, one will respond to a vertical line, the other one will respond to a horizontal line, and so that's how we see is because these different columns that correspond to different lines activate in the certain 360 field of the retina, and that's how it creates that image.
Yeah,
So
it's
I just
very
found that
direct and
fascinating.
yeah, it's very direct and simple, and then it goes through successive layers of processing that become more and more complex after that. But at the basic level, there's some really simple, direct, and grid-like layout in the brain that makes it where they've actually been able to gather information from a person dreaming, and I think it's with a little over 60% accuracy that they were able to match to images that they found on the internet, and of course with it being a learning algorithm, it'll get better over time. But they're able to read people's dreams. Now, of course, it's very general right now, where basically if it's a tree, then they might be able to pull up tree. If they were reading, then they'll probably pull up a bunch of different characters from like text characters from books, etc. And so it's very, very general. But the point is here is that the technology is going to a point where we will have brain interface with computers, and it'll be very direct. And a lot of people don't. We've got this superstitious desire to make the human brain be something magical. However, it is a system, and so the point here is that cyberization is something that we're going to have to deal with. And what's unfortunate is I've already begun to recognize that there is a growing group of people who are kind of against it, like very viscerally. Like for instance, at one of the conferences that we went to, people were against transhumanism. Now, the transhumanism movement is basically they're kind of embracing cyberization. They're embracing expanding their lives through the use of different types of technology. And the people who are in the spiritual community are actually extremely against it. And I find it strange because here you have a group of people who believe that the spirit can reside everywhere and anywhere, and yet then when you talk about the spirit residing in a machine, suddenly they don't like it. So it's like, okay, so the spirit can reside in the rocks and in the trees, but if you put it in a machine that we make, then suddenly it's not okay. I don't understand that, but they have this. There's like this growing thing where they all agree. They're all like, oh yeah, transhumanism is the worst thing ever. And so it's so you've already got the roots of this kind of conflict that we will be facing. And unfortunately, when it comes down to it, it's going to be some of the most vulnerable and some of the people who we were trying to help. Here we have got, we've been developing these technologies for people who've lost limbs, people who've served, their country and have lost a tremendous amount. We're trying to bring that back to them, and then you're going to have these people who are against them, and so it's I'm glad that there are, here we have science fiction, and science fiction is really kind of becoming more, the whole movie industry, et cetera, is kind of moving into video games. And typically we've explored these ideas that that are on the horizon, very near on the horizon. We've been able to explore them and think about them, and and figure out how things could go wrong, so that we can see the ways through to find the ways that things might go right as well. And so I'm really glad that there are these sources of sci-fi that are bringing this conversation to the forefront, because Deus Ex, like I said, they're actually actively engaged in conferences for prosthetics, and they're constantly showing all of these ways in which prosthetics are being advanced through, like for instance, getting a 3D printed prosthetic arm is now extremely easy to accomplish. And that's there was this video of who's the actor who plays Iron Man? I can't remember his name, but anyway, he actually went and gave
Robert Downey Jr.
Yeah, he took this 3D printed arm to a kid who who needed it, and it was because he was a fan of Iron Man and stuff, and so it was this little kid getting a new arm through it. It was touching. It was cool. The point is, there's a conversation that is already happening, because cyberization is already happening. There is already these brain interfaces. The brain can be read and written to a limited extent. In other words, we have ways in which things are input into our brains, and once we just start to use those inputs more directly, then we will be able to use computer devices and things like that. And so that is also very much on the horizon. That will happen within most of our lifetimes, where people people will be able to access. So here we have, where everyone's okay with helping out someone who's lost function in their, in their arms, and we've found different ways of doing that. But here's the other thing: there's loss of brain function that happens very frequently with concussions. So you've got people who've been football and boxing, and of course in war, there's a loss of brain function, and we actually already use deep brain stimulation techniques, things that are more invasive. However, it is it's kind of automatic that's going to be transitioning to interfacing with computers and actually augmenting a person's ability to perform cognitive functions. In other words, literally, neural prosthetics are on the horizon as well. We're not quite there, but we are very, very close. Between the neural networks and how well those are progressing towards creating AI. So you'll actually have people who have these neural implants, and so then the thing is, you've got these people who have that Luddite feel about them, and they have that prejudice, and they have what are we going to do when we have these people that we've helped, and then you have these people who look at them in some way as they either have an unfair advantage, because that's already starting to happen, by the way. People are actually using prosthetics. They can sometimes outperform people with regular legs when they have certain types of prosthetic legs. And so there's going to be this kind of an envy, but then at the same time, a lot of times these are people who've lost something, and we're just making up the difference. So at the same time, you're also going to have people who want to augment themselves, and they're going to augment themselves, and that is going to happen, but that is going to, of course, be something that is for the very wealthy alone, and those people who don't have the resources to do so are not going to have the same advantages. And so there is a kind of interesting social unrest that a lot of people, we tend to just kind of focus on what's going on right now, but that is something that is going to be kind of on the horizon here the next 20 to 50 years. So I don't know. I guess I just I like to see how there is this potential for good or ill, and keeping an eye out for the positive ways in which we can use technology, I think, is very important, because we can't go backwards. It's we keep the people keep going back and forth between the idea of like, well, maybe we shouldn't do this, maybe we shouldn't do that. That's really not part of the equation. The idea that you shouldn't do something when it comes to advancing technology is not reasonable, because we will. I really recommend the Ghost in the Shell series, by the way, because they are they've already seen far enough in the future. That's one of the things with the Japanese, that they've been developing technologies. By the way, it was the Japanese, I'm pretty sure, that actually did the first dream recording that was done. Like I said, there's some. I think we've got some links that we'll put in the low bar or whatever. And so they've kind of had the idea that this is on the horizon, and how are people going to interact, because then there's the idea that once you augment your brain, you have additional abilities through the use of processors and things like that the human beings haven't really had access to before. Then you also open yourself up to things like viruses and like computer viruses. And so there's a variety of things that are that I think are right here, not just on the horizon, but are happening right now. And people, they either want to stick their head in the sand and don't believe that it could possibly be true, because this meat machine that we're made up of is somehow special. It's funny, how many times you can actually interact with a person who's they don't have any kind of religious viewpoint. They find themselves to be strictly scientific, yet when you start talking about the idea of a human consciousness being in a machine or something like that, they suddenly fly off the handle as though we're not meat machines. It's like, so what is it that you believe? Do you believe we're magic? And it's just so funny how they never really identified that they have this kind of basic belief that we're magic on the inside. And so there's kind of facing this coming future, whenever things start to change very dramatically, people tend to have a pushback, and they either kind of ball up and just deny it, which is where all of us kind of know about those old codgers who are ranting about technology and them their horseless carriages are going to be the end of us all, and so you have this happening over and over, and it's just funny. I think that because of the use of video games and things like that and sci-fi, those people who are part of that will have an advantage to be able to kind of accept that there's these possibilities of things going in certain ways and things going wrong, and I don't know, kind of seeing the technologies, because once you're introduced to those ideas, and while they're just kind of fun at first and they seem like that's something that's not very real, then you do the research and you find out, holy shit, this is real. This is actually occurring. They made a dramatization and a story of the future, but it's based upon something that is actually going on right now. And so I think that as we are developing these things, we're going to have to be careful, but we have to be able to know that we can't stop the future. We can't stop those things that are going to continue to progress. But what we can do is to not stick our heads in the sand and be aware that they're coming, and therefore try to think about the ways in which we can make sure that things don't go wrong before they ever do. And I think that's why I love sci-fi. That's why I love how video games have become the new way in which sci-fi makes itself into the public mind. And it's just funny how much games have done for. There's a few different like TED talks about the ways in which video games help people's brains, and it's funny, you've got this entire gamer generation that's been kind of kicked around for so long because the older generation is like, oh, them old video games are in the horseless carriages, and so you got those Luddites who don't want technology to progress, and yet it progresses anyway, and here you have a generation of people who are a little more capable of grasping the new technologies, because that's just kind of how it works. So I guess that's my whole shtick.
Well, like what I think of is I think technology, if used wisely, can actually bring out more of our humanity. For instance, VR could be used to bring out more empathy. I did a simulation where I got to see what it was like to have cerebral palsy and what it was like to go out and do everyday jobs like getting groceries and stuff like that. I think it was cerebral palsy. It's the one where you lose motor control, and an everyday thing like trying to grab a can of coffee, grounds or whatever is like really hard, or you forget how to suddenly count how much change you need to give the cashier. Everyday jobs, how it makes it like feel really difficult, or becoming a different gender, or being a different profession, or what it's like to be a soldier on a battlefield, or being able to simulate all types of lives that a lot of people don't know what it feels like.
Yeah,
it might actually make it easier to empathize with other people.
Yeah, it was before, it was always confined. You had to be a reader. You had to be somebody who read novels to really get that, and that's something that they've kind of shown about people who read novels, is they've been able to. It's an exercise in empathy and knowing what these other characters are going through and their motivations, and kind of getting their internal monologue, all of that sort of thing. So you have to read a tremendous amount to really be able to develop your empathy, kind of in a direct fashion, whereas tons of people they either don't have the time or they don't have the interest or whatever. And so here you have VR providing a platform that is fun and an engaging and easy way to advance people's their empathy. And that really is an interesting thing that's going on. And the funny thing is, as VR progresses and you've got the preservation of all of these things in 3D, once we actually start to cyberize more and more, the ability to actually directly experience those things, we will be glad that we have captured history in that format, so that it can be better experienced through a cyberized means.
Oh yeah, I mean, there's times I wish that I could have. My grandfather was, I don't know, maybe it's a farmer thing or what it was, or maybe it was the generation. The family would gather around him, and he would have the craziest stories of what it was like in the old days, and he was so good at telling stories. But he only went to school up to grade 3, but he could orally tell the most amazing stories. And I always wondered what it would be like if he had technology where you could wear it, and you don't even have to think about it anymore, and you just capture, your experiences, and future generations or whoever you want to share it with can actually step into that and be there, in time as that person.
Yeah, and experience their entire life.
Yeah, I mean that would be like a treasure if you could see what it was like for your grandfather, or share that with someone else, or I can imagine a kind of a YouTube type thing where people start recording their own lives in that way and sharing them, unedited, just raw.
Yeah, it's things like that. There are so many different positive possibilities in our future, and one of the things is when you're the programmer type of person and things like that, you tend to have this view of things that is, you try to look at the ways that things could go wrong, and so you end up kind of, it's a mindset that can go terribly wrong, because you start thinking, oh, it could go wrong this way, it could go wrong that way, it's never going to work, because you start seeing all the ways that things could go wrong, and it's a valuable resource to have people who are troubleshooters, who are thinking all the ways that things are going wrong, because we have to have that. But at the same time, you really need people who are dreaming of of everything that could go right. We have to have something to look forward to. We have to be able to, the future is coming, there's something going to happen, and if we can see as many different ways that things could go right as possible, then we can have something to shoot for, something to aim for, something, a direction to move towards, and not just trying to hold back everything and just in a belief that everything's going to go wrong. And so it's funny how you've got these two different kinds of, engineer versus artist mindsets, and how it's important that they work together.
Winter is coming. We have heard suspiciously little from the birthday doge, who may not be here. Sorry for putting you on the spot, Brian. If there's anything at all you feel
his birthday, he can do anything you want.
No. I'm here. It's just you guys are carrying on just fine. I mean, I'm having I'm not really sure that there's much I can add. I think that there's a lot of good there, and definitely, VR has. It seems like it's almost gonna. It's like it's gonna be a tool that is actually probably more useful, not as a game or not as simply as entertainment, but rather as things for training and education, and to put, like what Jonathan was talking about, for empathy, provided that it is, of course, used responsibly. And yeah, I mean, like, I think that you guys are basically covering most of the bases. So.
Well, something, in the world of social internet type stuff, and chat and all that, and having avatars, one curious thing that has kind of arisen in development of creating social chat platforms used for like VR is that, especially in the adult side, in VR you can create an avatar that is completely virtually supposed to be you, and everybody always has a tendency to make themselves as hot and beautiful as possible. But one strange thing started to happen is that hotness didn't really, attract anybody. What attracted people and created bonds was your personality and who you were. It actually forced people to actually have to look past that and forced them to actually have conversations and things like that, because everybody looked good.
Yeah. No, yeah, I see what you're. It's basically that's because I think that has more to do with we as people, when we have like a desire for other people to see us not as we are, but as we would like to be, and less to do with the actual technology. Because in a VR thing, right? Like, let's say, and this is kind of a big if, because currently I think that virtual reality and the processing power to make it work, because you would need a very powerful machine so that it runs at a certain frame rate, and you would have to pay pretty good money to get that, as well as the VR itself, plus enough people would have to use it in order to make it viable enough. But let's say down the line, because as we get into a new sort of technological field, what often comes is first it comes out and it's really expensive. So you get your first adopters, which are the people who have the resources to afford it, and they start to use it. And as they do that, then the people who have developed it can find ways to develop it cheaper over time. And then after a while, everyone can get access to it. Just consider cell phones. In the 80s, people had cell phones, but they were incredibly expensive, so you had to be literally like Michael Douglas from Wall Street to have one. But today, everybody has them. I live in a really low-income area, and most people here have cell phones. And it was mainly because of those early adopters. So over time, perhaps, VR will have advanced in technology because the current cell phones today are way, way better than the ones from the 1980s, and they're a lot cheaper, too. So imagine in 10 years or however long it might take, there is, and also you have to consider that the younger generation that is more sort of attracted to technology than older generations. Like people who watch TV today are mostly older people who don't understand YouTube, they don't get the internet, so they just turn on the boob tube, you know. So that would be the same, you know, like the younger people that are more interested in futurism are going to adopt rather this into their lifestyle, and the older people, as they sort of then that will become a more viable medium, and it is likely that the old mediums will either adapt or they will die as well. For example, you were talking about the horse and buggy thing. That is definitely a dead technology. I'm using the word technology loosely here. But it still exists. Like, you know, you can find Mennonites, and there are places in Chicago where people do it for the novelty and all that. But it's not practical. People don't keep horses in the city. So it'll probably go that way. But anyway, going back to what I was saying before. When enough people have access to VR and the technology isn't expensive, so expensive and sort of inaccessible to the majority of people, what will likely follow is we will probably get social networking that will be done through that. Not long ago, for example, there was, what was it, Second Life, which people can go into and they could, like, I don't even know what you do in that game. I guess it's like The Sims, but you talk to other people, and you can have relationships with them and all that. And of course, you can make your avatar look however you like. I'm guessing that as we move forward in virtual reality technology, it will also likely, just like many other mediums, it will probably be first used to essentially interact with other people. So it'll be used as a networking thing. Imagine a Facebook-like thing where you actually travel and walk around in some kind of virtual space, and you can talk to other people who happen to be online and interact with them and hang out without actually leaving your living room. I'm guessing that will be one of the goals of it.
Brian, can I actually interject? We're already there. We're already there. You could buy a $99 Gear VR and stick your Samsung phone in it, and they've also got alt space and all that stuff to go in, and you can socialize with people around the world. You could even, you know, get phone calls while you're socializing and share the phone call with everyone you're socializing with. You can transport yourself to any environment you want, and you could do that. You could share video, watch a movie together. You could do all kinds of stuff. That's on the low end. Actually, you go even lower. You could use Google Cardboard type stuff, which still uses cell phones, which people already have. On the upper end, you could get an Oculus or a Vive. And there's like 20 or 30 other headsets that are coming down the line. So I mean, we're already there, and they're using technology that everybody already has. They're starting off with having the high end for early adopters that you're talking about. They can afford it to help, because that's what's going to like help pay for it and push the technology. But they're also going to the people that have cell phones, and I guess I can throw in $99 or $30 to buy like a housing to stick it in with the proper optics and that in, or Google Cardboard for people who are even cheaper, and they can get it for like $5 or $10. So, you know, they've been trying to cover all the bases, and they've been trying to cover it in a way that pretty much anyone has, like nobody has any excuse not to try it out or use it.
Mm-hmm.
But the Vive and the Oculus Rift stuff eventually will be, their first units coming out, yes, will be what would be Google Cardboard now. We will get to the point where we won't have to wear such huge headsets. Actually, what excites me more is AR over VR. The idea that I can have a mixed reality where I can bring, simulated stuff into the real world.
Augmented reality, right?
Yeah.
Like Pokemon Go, sort of.
Yeah, except that's not true AR. That's more of an experiment where you look at a screen and you imagine you can kind of see this computerized thing overlaid over the video.
Yeah.
This is where there's an actual three-dimensional thing in your view at all times, and you can interact with your environment, and it tells you something about it. So.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was kind of. I think they tried to do a little bit of that with Google Glass, and I think did Google Glass also have the, instead of, like, there's one way in which you actually project it onto the glass and it reflects back to you, but then there's they have it where basically it's kind of projecting directly onto the retina from a very tiny projector, and so you have what's you basically wear glasses that you're seeing through. It's just like a regular thin pair of typical reading glasses kind of glasses, and but then because there's a tiny lens that it can reflect off of, it can then project a large full screen image that can be augmented reality.
Yeah, the thing that I'm excited to get is called the Meta 2, and that the founder of that company, he's a neuroscientist. So and he's also like this kind of whiz guy or whatever, and he worked for the military. So you're talking about military, technology driving us forward. Well, he's one of those guys, but he went into the private sector and formed this company, and he wants to kind of, he wants to get rid of regular computer screens that we won't need them in the future. We don't need to have like 3 screens or whatever. We'll have an unlimited real estate now, and it'll be the entire world. So.
Yep, that's basically going to be the future. I mean, it's happening. It's going that way, and it's a matter of how do we want to make sure that we drive it before it gets here? Because that's the thing. We got to lay out plans and make sure it goes in the direction we want it to go, and not in just any way that it could go, which could go terribly wrong as well.
Yeah, and I mean the train's already left the station, so it's up to everybody in society to add their voice to how it's going to evolve and change and stuff. We're not going to stop it. We never have been able to stop technology, but we certainly can shape it together to be something that serves as many people as possible for the good.
Yeah, good stuff.
Absolutely. And yeah, we have evidence of it helping already. And yeah, like you guys said, it's already here. We're already doing cyberization. As if you guys are paying any attention to the video a little bit, you could see that there's a man, an amputee, who has now basically equivalent of working arms. And of course, we had some runners with little bionic legs. It's already happening. And what you guys were talking about there with the Google Glass, etc., kind of reminded me of Eden of the East, which is a fun anime movie, this series, whatever. And that's a lot of fun and has kind of a similar premise of seeing added augmented reality, and it's kind of like it reminds me a lot of what Flickr was doing a bunch of years ago. There's a TED Talk about it where they had a reconstruction of 3D imagery based on photos that people were uploading. So they were using the entirety of Flickr's database of user-submitted photos as a way to tag them to geolocations and create basically their own equivalent of a 3D type thing. And obviously VR can help do that much easier, but as you guys were also mentioning, the price tag is a bit on the higher side at the moment, but eventually it will be less. So currently, I think more of the vets and the amputees are the ones kind of getting the benefit of the early adoption without having to spend a lot of money because it's being tested still at this point.
Yeah,
And
unfortunately, that fellow, he actually only gets a very, very short period of time to try that. He doesn't get to take that home, and because it's not been approved, and so even though his progress was, you could see he was still a little bit off. That was with very little time, and the doctors know that he would, if he had the ability to take that home, he'd be using like his own limbs, very easily. But just I don't know. I think it's like he only gets like an hour a week or something for like a month, and he was still using the limbs, almost like his own.
at
But
that
you know
point,
something?
go
Oh,
ahead.
sorry. I was just going to say that for those that still can't afford it and they want a premium experience, I mean, I remember back in the 80s when Apple and all the companies were fighting over like schools and trying to have their computer to be what schools use to get kids into this new technology that they've been building up, this new marketplace. And Apple was huge in that sort of thing. And I've been seeing them doing that with VR. Kids are going to be going to school and they're going to be introduced and using these devices. So they're already being introduced and they're going to be expecting it, and they're going to be very adept and they're going to be excited about it, and they're going to be developing this stuff. So I guess we all have to start kind of catching up because they're already being introduced to it. This is going to be their future, their world. So we have to shape it though for them.
Yep, and definitely make sure it goes in the right direction. On the whole, anti-technology thing, it's one of those things that I've put a lot of thought into personally because, I used to just be like, well, of course, technology is just great. It's the greatest thing ever. I had a natural affinity to technology but then, after a while, you really look into all the different things that have gone terribly wrong, for everything from keeping us separated from each other, in ways that are completely not natural to the way that we evolved, and a variety of the ways in which we've created technology related illnesses and things like that, and you start to be like, man, maybe this isn't the best thing ever. But the thing is, you have to look at it from a perspective. People try to say, oh, it's not natural, that's kind of a fallacy when you think about it, because everything, so long as, if you've got a religious thing against it, I don't know that there's much I can really say, but if you look at it from an evolutionary perspective, and that's what evolution has been doing, that's what life has been doing this entire time, is creating new ways to solve problems. Just because they happen to be wet nanotech doesn't mean that it isn't technology. It is a technological advancement. Each time that a species finds new ways to solve problems, the new ways to do things, new ways to interact with each other, all of those things are technological advances. Technology is that's what life does, and so to say that technology is not natural is an absurdity, because I think if at its basis that there's nothing more natural than the production and evolution of technology. So I guess it's just one of those things when I'm sure that plenty of people like myself have had those conversations about the woes of technology versus the advantages of technology, and I know that's always come up in crowds of people who do programming and things like that. But I guess I just kind of wanted to add that so that people kind of, if you think about that is that the argument that people typically bring, it just doesn't work. Technology is a natural progression, and it's just something that, so long as you adapt and find ways for it to work, then it is categorically good, because you have to take the good with the bad. That's just how reality works. You have to realize everything has a downside to it, and so you just maximize the good parts and accept that there will be losses.
Amen. Absolutely agree with that. And yeah, that's basically, we're talking about technology and progressing forward. And as you mentioned, there are a lot of people in the extremely, some would call it wooish, or just, the really liberal, spiritual, left, where, they are strangely bigoted against any kind of cyberization, which I would assume them to be the first adopters, but instead they're being kind of like this classic prejudiced thing that Overwatch, the game, and Deus Ex: Mankind Divided is going forward. It's like, and this kind of reminds me, because we're talking about all this, and Loot Crate Gaming's theme that we just got was Mecha, and that's why we had a little claptrap. Anyway, unboxing video coming soon. The point is, though, Borderlands and other games have already been, talking about this, and TV shows have been talking about this. By TV shows, I mean like movies, is what I meant. We had like Automata and Ex Machina, and iRobot was a bit too far back, but in the past, just 5 to 10 years, we really had a big confluence. Is that even the right word?
Yeah, well, it's like confluences, things coming together. So yeah, there's a lot of it's coming together from a lot of different angles. I agree.
A lot of entertainment, media, and just movies. They're just having this conversation, and I think Kurzweil's Singularity article thing kind of possibly kicked it off strongly.
Yeah, but at the same time, it kicked off the bigoted thing. I just find it just blows my mind, because the spiritual group of people who consider themselves very spiritual and things like that, their biggest thing is like this acceptance and not being bigoted, and here they are almost ubiquitous. I was just dumbfounded to find out that they're almost all adopting this type of bigotry, is that the right word? Towards cyberization, towards AI as well, of course.
Okay. Well,
so it's like so they'll be the ones who don't grant any validity. Once we have strong AI, they'll be the first ones decrying that it doesn't actually have a soul, is what it seems like to me, which is just that's just exactly the opposite of what their whole philosophy is usually supposed to be geared towards. That's the picture they give of themselves. That is exactly the opposite of it.
Look,
so I was just
I have a theory, and I'm sure they have their counterpart in the more conservative. I doubt Alex Jones is like thrilled about having AI and cyborgs. You know what I'm saying? Like I bet there's a counterpart to this liberal in the other side of the political spectrum. But
the other side of the horseshoe.
Yes, exactly. So I'm having a little bit of fun with this, but so. Hold on a second. I just had this great idea, and then it slipped away. But we're talking about having these people who are in the specifically Contact in the Desert community. So it's a lot of people, sure, at this conference, and I'm sure, like I said, they have their counterpart in the other spectrum of politics. But it's possible, just hear me out, that there's a group of people at the Contact in the Desert convention, like their type of community. Not huge, but not small either. They got their thing going, and you remember how in the middle of that random panel there was that random, oh my God, worship women thing, little brain aneurysm where you just had to like stop and pray to women.
Oh my God, yeah, I remember that.
I'm considering putting that. I don't know how much I can share of that publicly, so I don't know if I can put it on YouTube publicly, but I'm kind of considering sharing it with patrons, because there's a whole point I got that DVD of that panel, because it was like in the middle of nowhere. It was just suddenly like, let's pause and pray to women. It was bizarre, but
it was weird. It was almost, and it was very religious-like. And the funny thing is that there is within that community of there's these set beliefs that you have to have the whole set. You got to take both the baby and the bathwater.
Right.
You have all these.
Yeah. So you have these group of people that are like, okay, so the earth is the mother and the women are the greatest, so patriarchy sucks, right? Therefore, by extension. And everything vibrates to an energy, and so, like, aliens are awesome because they're the ones that, like, give us the energy, and, like, we vibrate on this energy. But then, like, anything that man creates, you notice I said anything that man creates, So if we were to create, like, AI and cyberization that men, the patriarchy did, that would just be, like, it would kill us all, Terminator, like. But like aliens and all this other spiritual shit, and there's consciousness and everything else that's of the mother, of the natural, of the feminine, of the bullshit. And that's my theory. There we go.
They really don't know history, do they? And they really don't know what man means. I mean, man means humanity.
All of us. Yeah.
I mean, maybe we really shouldn't have got rid of, the males. What is it? We had our own name to,
You mean Wehrman?
Yeah, Wehrman. Maybe we shouldn't have lost that, because ever since then, everything's been blamed on, when we say man, we're actually referring to mankind, like all humanity. But they say it's patriarchy, it's man. But it's the most ludicrous thing I've ever heard in my life. Stopping in the middle of the desert, which reminds me, Anna. You'd be excited because you know that Fallout 4, they're going to be releasing a VR version next year.
That is exciting. What platforms, though?
All of them.
Oh, fun.
They first said the Vive, but I know it's going to be out for all of them. I mean, they'd have to. It'd be ludicrous. They said the Vive first because Oculus doesn't have its touch controllers out, but they will be out by then.
Well, I'm considering looking into getting a VR type, and obviously there's so many, and they're all really steeply priced for, there's really no entry piece. And I'm kind of really considering the PS for potentially. I was, but recently I heard that the Xbox One is actually going to have. They're coming out with this like Scorpio or something it's called, which is basically a much stronger processor. And there's an assumption that is going to actually have VR come with it because they're kind of gearing up to have that really strong processor for VR, and it makes more sense to go ahead and get this stronger, higher resolution, basically VR-ready Xbox vehicle instead of going for the PS4, which is currently at a lower resolution. So I'm still not sure what we're gonna do with all that, but yeah. So I don't know.
I'd like to play JoJo's Excellent Adventure VR.
I still have so many games to play, but of course we have to talk about the adventure kind of reminded me of Leisure Suit Larry for some reason, because that would be the VR game I would play. But I mean, think about
oh my God, that's hilarious.
Grand Theft Auto and all games like that. I mean, and just we already have the feminist group, the feminism 3.0 on the web. They're already coming out against Cortana on the Windows 10 and a variety of other things like that, because and I think it was Lori Penny too that had this infamous article titled that why do we have female robots or female AIs or some such, as that people don't like to consider their feelings. It's like, what, are you serious? We're talking about literal programmed AI, non-existent characters, and you're saying we don't care about their feelings? You're out of your mind. Just, oh my God, I can't even begin to address the insanity of that article title and the whole article itself. But just the idea is already that we are abusing women because of Cortana telling her what to do and Siri telling her what to do. So I can only imagine.
What about Siri's feelings? God.
Exactly.
Ordering her around.
Just don't care about her feelings because she's a fucking robot. That's not a person. Oh my God, I can't even. Oh my God. So I can already imagine the shitstorm that games, not even Leisure Suit Larry, that would never be allowed potentially if we do not break away from people who seek to control everything that other people do.
Ironically, if VR becomes a really big hit, one of the most important adopters of it in order to make that possible will be the porn industry. And I know that they're already looking into it. But if it blows up with porn, it's going to blow up everywhere.
It's going to blow up everywhere.
Yeah, it's already started.
I was going to talk about that. There's I actually meant to earlier, but I forgot that was part of the context, that you guys were talking about that military is what gets technology. Sure, yeah, but no, but porn does first. And there's some links there.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, with the military thing, it's got its uses, but the average person is way less concerned with what's going on with the military. That's infinitesimally small compared to the number of people that would use it for porn. That would be much bigger.
Oh yeah.
So absolutely.
I love that in the low bar there's not only do we have robots with basically skin-like features, and real dolls already exist in that sense. I mean, it would be once we develop comprehensive AI, which Boston Dynamics is working on the motion, albeit awkwardly. We might. Well, okay, I was gonna make a really bad joke about nerds, which I am one myself, but I'm not going to because that'd be mean. But anyway, Boston Dynamics are working on the motion, and then the real dolls already have the kind of skin texture, and there's a real skin, smart skin for prosthetics that I linked in the low bar, and as well as another link to Robotica, which is talking about sex robots basically. So we're already getting there, and the feminist sort of outrage, I can only imagine. But what feminist outrage usually is what you guys see on the screen there. It's complete hypocrisy. Anyway, Brian, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to add on top of that is just as an aside to the porn thing. When people on Twitter and in social media, they make jokes about why we need to elect certain presidents, and the joke is, elect President X, and they will be able to perform miracles for the country, right? I mean, it's a joke. It means that you're putting a bit too much faith in this person. But one of the recurring running gags is elect President X, and they usually say this about like Ron Paul and like these sort of third-party guys, and he'll make anime real. And that's obviously funny, but the fact is, if the porn industry makes the virtual reality thing huge, it will make anime real. So Japan will be all up ons, and there will be cel-shaded Neko girls and succubi for you to virtually have sex with. I'm not kidding.
Well,
totally gonna happen.
Brian? Well, you know something, Brian? They're like, I saw there's this technology. It's kind of like a telepresence thing, but it's also with the VR stuff and that, where you've got this, I guess, this thing for a man to put their penis in, and then they got this thing for a female to insert into her, and it will transmit her contractions, whatever she's doing with her body, over to him, and he will feel. So it'll be like he's feeling like as if he's having sex with her remotely. And then when you have VR, like a 3D thing, and you can interact, but you can have transmitted sex through the internet. I mean, but imagine, it starts with sex, but imagine applying that to other things, like, I don't know, sending out remote robots to be able to, pick things up, and then the sense that it gets off of the surface, it transmits, and you could feel it to control these things, because it's hard for robots to manually, control things, because they don't understand the sense of touch and other things like that. But it all starts with the sex thing, and I just thought that was
yeah, that's true. And the thing is too is I saw a video where they're saying, and of course this could be, because the thing about VR is actually I think the first VR machine was in the 1980s. So it's pretty old. I mean, back then though, the only thing they could look at were like wireframe, rooms and stuff. But they were messing with the idea back then. So now they're talking about, and I say they with a capital T, how to include, because the one thing that is another shortcoming of virtual reality is that it doesn't actually take advantage of all of our senses. So there is something missing. Like we don't have the sense of smell isn't being included, and the sense of touch, right? But that's also something that they're working on, and they're gonna. I think that what the goal would be to essentially trick the brain into thinking that you're touching something or smelling something, as opposed to creating an actual, stimulus in the area, like a physical object that you're touching, because that would probably, even though it would require more time to get right, that would actually probably be more cost effective in the long run if they can do that. So, and one of the other things I was thinking is, and it's just as an aside, it's obvious that there would be a benefit to the industry's growth, especially if the porn industry, which it has begun doing, they're already using 360 cameras, and they're including VR in their stuff, and of course it's a multi-billion-dollar industry, so they can afford to do that. It's really great that exists, but I wonder if there isn't some, like, what the ultimate goal could be is, instead of just allowing people to escape and go, I don't know, have sex with, like, Hatsukune Miku or whatever her name is, but instead to actually interact with other real people and maybe try to build something with them using these tools to connect to other human beings. I think that would be something that I would like to see more of, personally.
Yeah, it's a version of Minecraft. I mean, you have these unbelievable worlds that people create in Minecraft. Imagine what they're going to do with VR.
Yeah.
And ultimately, people always want to get together. I mean, I bet internet was created not necessarily to download porn alone or per se, but I think to get together and meet other people, that was a big part of it too.
Oh, I'm sure
chat rooms and things like that were invented.
Yeah, I'm sure that's the reason why it became so big, is mainly because of connecting with other people. There is just something far more rewarding about, I mean, just look at social media, Instagram and Twitter and Facebook. Everybody's on there, and their main goal is to get as much essentially as much validation as possible from other people. And
Yeah,
so
ultimately,
the interaction with other people far outweighs their ability to, do something in their own sort of little box.
that's
Well,
a side thing, and it's nice to have. But I feel like, yeah, people very much want interaction and a relationship with another person. It's just who else. It matters though to have the other outlet, because doesn't matter how many guys are going to be online, if the Japanese girls are not going to be online, that's not going to really, they're not going to meet anyone that way. So that's the unfortunate part. It does require participation on both genders, but in other countries, and people my generation, etc., you'd get on ICQ or whatever the thing you were talking on, and you would want to meet because that you want a relationship in the real world. And I think that's why Second Life blew up as much as it did, because most people are there to look pretty, show off, basically a grand old party where they look their best, which is not necessarily their real self, and then have cyber sex. That's like the point. So I feel like that's not going to be a problem for people to meet each other through VR. I feel like it'll be one of the first things that'll happen.
But there's also this volunteerism thing that is enabled through. I mean, okay, so we've had people making tools for people to use because you know what, people like to help others. People love to be able to create something and then other people use it or view it or interact with it. And the more interactive that something is that they can create, the more people like it, and the more that it makes an impression on people. And so there's this craving for kind of like a social validation that is when you can create things that people enjoy. There's a huge amount of social validation, and so by having these tools where people can create, there's this type of volunteerism. And then you take that and you think about the fact that here's a thing to look at that's very interesting, that's kind of on the rise, that is also seemingly in our future, is a change to the way economics works because of the fact that virtual objects now have real value to people. It's something that I remember talking about 10 years ago. People would almost roll their eyes because, well, they just couldn't see it, but now it's there. It's and now that it's tangible, people can follow along. And that is that you've got these things that we care about. We spend a tremendous amount of us that are part of the video game generation spend a tremendous amount of time and lovingly value those things that we have found online, things that we've created online, things that we have obtained online, and all of these virtual objects that mean a tremendous amount to us. And so the point is that they're virtual objects and virtual things. People spend their entire lives creating virtual objects now, and they have real value. So what does that do economically speaking? What does it when something is created, it's and then can be redistributed, but still has value? And so there's a marked change in the way economics works as we begin to become more and more of a computerized species. That's something that I don't know if anybody has watched Sword Art Online. That's another great anime that's basically kind of broaching the topic of virtual reality very, very deeply, and how as virtual reality progresses, then there will come to a point in which virtual reality and regular reality, there's very little difference between the two. It's just another reality that you can participate in, and you can choose to participate in one reality or the other, and the objects and the people and the things like that are valued just as much. And the thing is that will change the way in which people, their whole value system, about relationships, about objects, about everything, will be radically changed by this revolution as it starts to progress and starts to become more and more a part of regular everyday life. And so the people who are part of the video games, part of cyberization, and part of this type of augmentation, they will have a very different way of looking at reality, looking at the virtual objects, the value of things, and of course, like I said, once again, volunteerism, the interaction with other people, and the ability to create things and have other people benefit from your creations, and have the kind of satisfaction that gives you. And so you end up creating something that is I don't know exactly what to call it, but there's a community that is of something, and we have an opportunity for a community that we've just never had before. Humanity has never had this opportunity before. There's never been a situation for us to do the things that we can do in the ways that we can do them. And so there's just new ways and new possibilities that are on the horizon that can be something that we can look at as a very, very beautiful possibility, and a very beautiful future that we can make happen with these new technologies.
Yeah, I can see a day where like platforms like say Skype will be using things like AR. So I know a lot of people, like we use Skype a lot for doing meetings and things like that. Imagining having a meeting, but you can use AR and you can actually project the people that are not actually present in your room, but you can actually put them there as if they're sitting at the board table or the living room or whatever space you want to conduct the meeting in. I'm going to see this stuff embedded in all kinds of things everybody takes for granted every day. So, I mean, one thing I've been working on is trying to find some way to create a virtual badger cave that people can explore in there, and you can actually do radio shows through it, and the audience is actually present in the space, just like a real kind of a talk show type thing.
Yeah, that's cool as shit. Yeah, just do the entire thing VR. That would be so neat, because then you kind of could have like an audience there. It's almost like you have some people up on stage, almost like a panel, and basically create kind of where every time it's like a virtual conference.
Yeah.
That definitely sounds like super awesome. And yeah, VR is basically where we're going with entertainment and just technology in general, and all of that holographic like type stuff that we see in futuristic movies. I don't know if we're there yet, but at least we're definitely going to see a shit like that through the VR. And who knows how much is going to integrate from the bulky Oculus helmet to something like Google Glass to, you know, Retina cameras. Who knows? The possibilities are endless, and it's quite exciting. So I don't know. I'm personally definitely team H+. That's the symbol for transhumanism, and also a cool show. So yeah, I think that about wraps up our show. And if anyone has any final words to say on the topic, go ahead. But other than that, we might wrap it up, as you should with your tip always.
Whoa.
I'm just saying, like, just throwing that out there. Also, happy birthday, Brian.
Oh, Brian.
And okay, that's all Brian wanted to say. All right, cool. Anyway.
It's his birthday.
True. I shouldn't bully him on his birthday.
Cyberbullying.
We've got to send him a virtual birthday cake or something like that.
Well, he already has enough cake. Like, let's send him pies.
An augmented.
Yeah, make
well,
that
it would
pie.
be 0 calorie. There'd be no calories in it. You can eat all you want and not worry about it.
It's like
Zero satisfaction.
cheesecake or carrot cake is fine though.
Cheesecake is the best,
okay.
but I don't understand how you can have those two in the same sentence. That's just like not even right.
I like both of those things. Although I think of cheesecake as more of a pie to me. I don't know why they call it cheesecake, but I guess cheese pie sounds less appealing.
Yeah, they probably actually have a cheese pie.
That sounds pretty good to me.
Well, I thought that's what a pizza pie is. I thought that's
True.
what a pizza.
Yeah, or a calzone.
Yeah.
It's like a folded over cheese pie.
Well played, sir.
This conversation has devolved into food suddenly.
God, I'm hungry.
I think we're all hungry. It's time to break for dinner. And anyway, thank you guys so much for joining us for this CherrySTEM number 11. And we will actually, as you know, we had to reschedule this one from last week, and we will be having another one at the end of this month. The topic is really fun and juicy, so stick around for all that. And as we mentioned before, the show is brought to you by entirely volunteer work. And if you like the HBO mothership, please feed the badger. That's patreon.com/honeybadgerradio. That is 2 R's, Badger Radio, yeah, just in case. And of course, if you like our work and want to see more CherrySTEMs, we are getting close to our 666 goal of providing 2 shows of CherrySTEM a month, and that would be a regular topic show and in the beginning of the month, and a call-in show at the end of the month. So that's exciting. And check that out on patreon.com/AnnaCherry. And Direhawk, Jonathan, where can people find your work most easily, I suppose?
Well, you just go to www.sketchfab. That's, what is it, SKETCHFAB.com, and then /Direhawk. And you'll see all the models that I posted thus far.
Good times.
And then any videos that I posted on the Honey Badger channel.
yes, definitely follow Honey Badger Radio on Twitter and here on YouTube. Subscribe. Join us for future shows when we have them in the future, if you know what I'm saying. Thanks for sticking around, and we will see you guys later this month. Goodbye.